Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rico Borrego.
I am your other co-host, Tony Borrego.
And this is the podcast known as Relatively Sound, the podcast that is under review. Today, we are going to be taking a look at some albums that have dropped this year. Tony, I know over the last couple of years, you maybe haven't stayed up to date with all like your band's most recent releases. Is that fair to say?
Yes. I don't really have a justification for why, but I really just haven't really been up to date with things. But thanks to this podcast, it's kind of one of my goals to become up to date with things and, be a follower of music, so to speak.
And I'm someone that's the opposite. I'm someone that's always looking at bands that I like and seeing when they're releasing new music. That said, every year I feel like I've been trying to branch out to newer artists or just artists that I don't listen to, especially if they have a new album that's released that is like critically acclaimed. But this year, at least in the genre of music that Tony and I listen to, there's been a lot of releases, and we're going to be talking about 3 of them today. We're going to be talking about the new Ben Folds album, the new Foo Fighters album, and the new Queens of the Stone Age album. 3 bands and artists Tony and I enjoy. Really quick, I do want to give some honorable mentions because there's some albums that we are not going to talk about today just because maybe Tony and I haven't both listened to them. I want to do a shout out to the Boy Genius record that came out earlier this year called The Record. As you may know, it's a band that's formed by Phoebe Bridgers, Lucy Dacus, and Julian Baker, kind of a super group of sorts. Very solid album. I very much enjoyed it. Also want to give a nod to Gord Downey's most recent record that was released due to Bob Rock finishing the album. It's an album they started working on before Gord passed away in 2016. And fantastic album. Really enjoyed that one. Couple of other honorable mentions. Death Cab re-released their most recent record, but in an acoustic version, which was awesome to hear. And then U2 also earlier this year in March released like a 40-song project of re-recordings of songs throughout all of their catalog, which was maybe a little much, but definitely had some enjoyable moments, especially if you're a U2 fan. And then the last mention I want to give is the new Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit album called Weather Vanes, which we're not going to talk about on this episode, but we will in a future episode, and we'll get to that at the end of this podcast. But yeah, wanted to give those albums a mention, but let's start with the first album we're talking about today, Ben Folds' most recent record, What Matters Most is the name of the album, was released in June, and technically it's his 5th studio album, but as I think they mean solo album, but he's done so many projects, it's kind of hard to keep track of what he's released. That said, he hasn't really released anything since his album So There all the way back in 2015. So one of the largest gaps in his catalog. Some of that was due to COVID. Going into this album, I was really excited. Tony, were you excited, or were you kind of like not sure what to expect? Someone who doesn't keep track with all his solo albums?
Yeah, real quick. So I love Ben Folds 5, like one of my favorite bands, but Ben Folds solo projects, I just never have gotten into. And I have heard some songs that I've really loved from them. Even a song from the Over the Hedge soundtrack I really dig from him. But so, I was kind of excited to actually be up to date with one of his new records when it's actually being released. And I was very excited after hearing the first single, which we will dive into. But real quick, did you mention to me that like this was probably going to be his last solo studio album, or am I just making that up?
No, he mentioned that while doing like press for this new album. It was brought up to him like, is this going to be your last album? And he has kind of hinted towards it being his last album. He says he's not sure what he's going to do in the future. He says he might want to do some like Broadway shows, like
What?
some songwriting for Broadway. He's been approached about doing Broadway for a long time, and he has a couple songs that kind of have that sound. The Secret Life of Morgan Davis basically is like a Broadway song, but like a very crude one.
And I
And
mean
he,
the track Back to Anonymous, which we'll probably get into, kind of does seem to kind of hint at that about maybe stepping back from, you know, releasing music maybe.
yeah, and it seems like he still likes to play live music, but he likes to play with orchestras a lot, and he likes to conduct, you know, orchestras. So he kind of made it seem like, you know, he will only do a new album in the future if he feels like he has something to say, which we've heard from a lot of artists before, you know, Billy Joel, not even just because of the piano, you know, comparison, but like he stopped releasing albums decades ago, but he still tours. So I can see that being something he does in the future. But yeah, so this could be the last like pop album we get from him. And if it is, I think it's a very solid last album. Even if we don't consider it his last album for forever, I do think it's a solid return. Um, my first impressions, I will say, on first couple of listens, it was a little underwhelming, just a little bit. What did you think on first impressions?
I agree. So knowing Ben's work, something that's always kind of struck me is that he's very confident and fun and energetic for the most part. Like any songwriter, you have your ballads and serious moments. But I will say throughout this album, there definitely is a certain tone that I wasn't familiar with him. I feel like there was kind of a self awareness on the album. I guess I can't think of the best way to articulate that. But I will say it was a little underwhelming with certain tracks. But maybe let's talk about when we first heard Winslow Gardens, the first single. I remember the biggest thing when you're like, "Yo, check it out," was that there was something unusual for Ben. There was guitar in it.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess guitar isn't super uncommon. I know there was a couple songs in Memphis 5 that didn't make an album, like Emmeline that has guitar. Um, and definitely on Rockin' the Suburbs, he had some guitars like the title track.
Or
But yeah,
even Brick was written on guitar.
yes, but definitely in the core of his albums and his songs, usually it's just like piano, drums, bass, and then maybe strings, other, instrumentation. But yeah, not usually guitar. Winslow Garden, yeah, was the first single, and I loved it. On first listen, I think I was mostly just shocked from like, wow, there's a lot of lush instrumentation, strings, like there's cowbell, electric guitar, like you said.
Kind of a throwback feel.
Yeah, it's got like a 70s vibe. And the more
And
I
it's
listen
in
to it,
7 too.
yes, yeah, the time signature also too was like interesting. And that too was I think a reason I had to take me a couple listens. But like after my third, fourth listen, I was like in love with the song. And I think that's one of the reasons why the first listen to the whole album was underwhelming to me, because I don't think there was a song that topped that song for me. Like Winslow's Garden still might maybe be my favorite from the album.
Same.
It's just very solid. And I think maybe the word you were looking for, at least the word that I found to be, coming in my head when I was listening to this album, was maturity. Like there's like Winslow's Garden is like, like there's not a lot of tongue in cheek in that song. It's a little storytelling, and there's like nice little moments in the lyrics. He's kind of talking about like album cover is like kind of two older people standing next to each other with like a cloud background behind them, almost like they're standing on the clouds. And those are like the people I think of when I hear Winslow's Garden. Like, um, and I think it was inspired by COVID. I think when COVID happened, he actually got like stuck in Australia because he was there at the
Australia.
time. Yeah, he was there at the time, and they weren't letting people fly, like leave the country. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong, but because as he has a song called Adelaide, and I know he used to live there for a while, and he might still have a house there. But going back to the Winslow Garden itself, like it's a very smooth, relaxing song, but it's got an upbeat energy to it, where it's not like slow and boring. Like it's a nice like little driving song, but it's just very sweet. Like you said, it has that kind of throwback vibe. And we get hit with the second single called Exhausting Lover, and it was like the complete opposite of Winslow's Garden, and I was very disappointed with it.
I I wasn't as disappointed as you were for sure because I thought there was a lot of things about the song that I did like. I just think that the big thing that kind of tainted it all were the lyrics. And, I get it. Part of his style is being humorous. And I'm not saying that once you become an older musician that you can't have fun songs like that, but it felt rather forced. The highlight for me is more of the kind of I'm not sure if you say gospel chorus, but I thought the chorus was really refreshing to hear on the album. And I don't even mind like the way he sings the verses, but the lyrics are so forward in the song that it's hard to ignore them.
I don't like the way he sings the chorus. I don't mind the music, but that falsetto, he does a lot of falsetto in his songs, but it felt the most forced and the most like not strong falsetto that he's ever done. Um, and like the lyrics and the verses, not only are they kind of cringy, but they're just like they're lengthy, they're wordy. So like in the verses, I just feel like they don't flow as nice as some of the other songs on the album. The instrumentation is fine. The like kind of electric keyboard is kind of cool, and there's a little horn bridge, which I think is cool. You get some horns, and it kind of still has that throwback '70s sound a little bit in the production. But
Right,
yeah,
right.
just the lyrics are just like they're lyrics that I don't really want to repeat on the podcast. Like they're just yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I
It's
think I think one of the highlight lyrics is definitely like running naked through the Cracker Barrel.
yeah, I don't know. They're just it's like I don't know if it was someone else singing the lyrics, like a younger person, they be funnier. But I don't know. I just there's something with the song that just doesn't click, and it has grown on me a little bit, but it's still probably my least favorite on the album, and it's like one that I wouldn't play out loud necessarily. Um, but to me, that's like the lowest point in the album. And then
Lowest.
okay. Well, what was your least favorite moment?
Well, I will say there's kind of like a few songs that kind of I thought were the most underwhelming. At least "Exhausting Lover" is kind of engaging to me. I mean, it's catchy in ways for sure. But like the three songs that were kind of at the bottom of the barrel for me were probably like "Fragile," paddle boat breakup," and even "What Matters Most." Um, I think not to jump too far over the album. Songs like "Christine from the Seventh Grade" and "Back to Anonymous" had the acoustic guitar in it that I thought was kind of interesting and refreshing. I dug that sound, and I actually quite like "Moments" as well. But some of those other ones are just a little forgettable to me, a little bland. Maybe they're growers.
I think they're growers because I'm sure I've heard this album probably more than you. I actually got the vinyl, a signed copy, by the way, colored. I think it's like a sea foam green kind of colored
Ooh,
record. Looks great. Um, I for sure the songs. Okay, you said Fragile. That is my probably second least favorite. That one to me is just kind of like it. It's. I think it's like in 6/8. It's kind of a slow kind of waltz. It's just kind of to me like not a lot going on. Like it has pretty melodies, but yeah, it's not engaging, I guess, like some of the other songs using the word you used for
and
Exhausting Lover.
and it's sparse and there's strings, but it kind of needs something else.
Yeah, so that one I can understand. Paddle Boat Breakup, which is a weird name for a song. That one I actually think is very underrated. Like I think that's probably like the sleeper on the album. Like it's it starts off like it's gonna be this like really old throwback song, like I don't know, like a song from like a old Disney film. But then it kind of just turns into like a more modern kind of pop song. But it's a song that kind of builds through the verses and choruses, and the choruses are like different each time, so they're kind of it keeps you kind of engaged in the song because it's like a storytelling song about like breaking up with someone while you're on a paddle boat ride with them, which I think is fun. See, that's like Ben Folds being funny,
That's
but
classic Ben
but
Folds.
not being like too absurd. Yeah, it's like classic Ben Folds. I the instrumentation, I think it does grow on you. Like it grew on me. Like on first listen, I didn't think too much of the song, but on repeated listen, I was like, oh, this is one of the more interesting moments on the album.
Well,
Um,
I think I see what he's going for, and I appreciate it, but I don't know if it maybe had quite the effect that he wanted, or maybe the effect that I wanted. But I could see it being a grower, and I do think it does stand out on the album. It's definitely not a song that I forgot about. Where Fragile, I'm kind of like, kind of sweep it under the rug. But I could see Paddle Boat.
Yeah,
It has potential, easy.
and what matters most, which is the title track. I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One, it musically, it is kind of like a song like Clouds with Ellipses, which is the second track on the album, where it's like it's a little bit more engaging than Fragile, but it's still kind of slow and soft enough to where it's like not the most, mind-blowing song, especially on first listen. But the lyrics to What Matter Most, I think, are very like one of his most mature songs. Like it's actually is inspired by his close friend who passed away
Oh,
during the last couple of years, which was Bob Saget. Surprisingly enough, Bob Saget and him were close friends, and as you know, he passed away I think 2 years ago. And um, so Ben Folds, while writing this album, especially during COVID, this was like a song that he like wrote about Bob Saget. And there's like a line where he's like talking about being at like a storage unit, and like he reads something interesting or whatever, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna call my friend and tell him about it. And then he like just remembers like, oh, he's gone, he passed away. So it's a very like kind of hard hitting lyric that if you don't know the backstory, it might not seem as hard hitting, but like once you do, it is like, a pretty tough lyric to get through. But I also think it's like a good representation of the album, for the most part, lyrically, like what matters most, especially this being kind of Ben's COVID album as well, where he's talking about the things in his life that actually matter the most to him, which I also think is a great segue into the last track, which you mentioned, Moments, which features a duo band called Tall Heights, who actually opened for Ben when I saw him like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And they're just like these two guys. One plays guitar and I think one plays like the cello. And they're a nice little kind of duo, kind of indie singer songwriter duo. And they are also touring and playing with Ben on his most recent tour right now. And they help him write that last song on the album, Moments, which is a very sweet send off to the album. It's like a very acoustic, light, breezy song. The cello and the acoustic guitar works, I think, really well with Ben's piano playing. Kind of takes a back seat, which is kind of nice for a Ben Folds song.
well, what I really dig with how it sits on the album is that it's one of the faster songs on the album, um, but it still maintains that acoustic feel. So I thought that was really nice, and it just sounds really nice. It's just pleasant.
Yeah, and the acoustic guitar you mentioned, was also on Back to Anonymous and Christine from the Seventh Grade. Back to Anonymous was the third single, and that was also a shocking moment, like Winslow's Gardens, because it like starts off with like acoustic guitar. Actually, acoustic guitar that reminded me of Elliott Smith a little bit. I can't tell you what song, but I think it's a song from Either Or. I'll have to go back and listen to it. But that very first chord that you hear on the acoustic guitar very much sounds like an Elliott Smith song to me.
Which I'm like between the bars.
Maybe.
It sounds like an A minor. So
yeah, it might be that song. And then in the middle of this, it's a very cool song. He's like talking about lyrically. I saw an interview where he mentions the song is about not only living somewhere where he like isn't as popular, but also during COVID where everyone's wearing masks, where he stepped outside and he wasn't recognized like he is sometimes, because he's
Oh,
not like the biggest celebrity musician, but like people know him, recognize him. But when during COVID, when everyone was wearing a mask, they didn't. So going back to Anonymous is like how he felt during COVID when people didn't recognize him anymore. So again,
that's
lyrically,
pretty
very,
cool.
very smart, mature. And then there's like a harmonica solo in the middle of the song, which sounds really cool. It's like a Western, like an old timey Western harp, or harmonica solo.
Yeah, I think the songs that I enjoyed the most had a they had a strong atmosphere to it, and they are all sort of like they sit well in the album together. Back to Anonymous, Moments, Winslow Garden. Like those have their own distinct vibes, their acoustic feeling. But those ones are kind of even up tempo a little bit, and I think that's really where the album hit me good.
Yeah, I think the second half of the album is stronger than the first half. I actually think.
Well, yeah, yeah. Okay, you're definitely right. Although I will say I really do like the opening track, but wait, there's more. It
Oh
just felt
yeah,
like kind of like a Ben Folds 5, something fun to try out.
it's weird. On first listen, I didn't really care for that song that much for some reason. And then for some reason, like my second or third listen, it hit me, and I was like, "Oh, this song's fantastic! It's got amazing harmonies. That weird little like electric keyboard kind of like loop that plays in the beginning works great throughout the song. Um, there's like hand claps. There's almost got like a not like a disco vibe, but again, like a kind of an older sounding throwback vibe. Horns, like it's very energetic. It's upbeat. Like you said, it does kind of give me a Ben Folds 5 kind of sound, or even Rocking the Suburbs. It even sounds like I one of his other solo albums, Way to Normal, which even makes sense because there's a lyric in that song, but wait, there's more, where he says, "Did you expect we'd go back to normal?" Which I wondered if that was a reference to his album. But yeah,
Interesting.
that opening song musically is it's one of my favorite moments on the album for sure. And I just love the phrase, the way he like the way they just kind of shout, "But wait, there's more," like in the background. Like it's very fun.
Right.
Um,
And something to me that really stands out about it is I think it's like the only song that really explores the dynamics in the sense of like there's an intro to it where it's like, I mean, I don't know, maybe like 40 seconds instrumental where it's just a keyboard. Like it's kind of it's kind of bold in that way. I mean, not that every album needs to explore those type of things, but it is just cool to kind of hear that. Especially like, you said this was how many years after the last album he released, to hear kind of an
2015, yeah.
intro, that keeps you on your toes. You're like, but wait, there's more. Come on, start the song. I want to hear it.
Especially because if our listeners know his last like I guess solo album he released was called So There in 2015, and that was an album he did with kind of this orchestra band, and a lot of the songs kind of have like a classical kind of sound to them because of that. So a lot of people don't really think of his last album So There as like a solo album because it's like a kind of this project he did with this orchestra, and the songs aren't, even though they do have a pop element to it, some of them don't. And the song on this album that sounds the most like that is Christine from the Seventh Grade. That song sounds exactly like it could have been on his last album, So There. Like it has an orchestra. It does have that added acoustic guitar, which is nice, but it's very like dramatic and it builds, and lyrically it's one of the funniest on the album. He's singing about this person named Christine who he used to know from the seventh grade, and this character he sings about is like this lady who like after she graduated school, like she got really into like conspiracy theories online and started posting like right-wing stuff on like Facebook, and it's got fantastic lyrics like um the misspellings, they must have been on purpose. So we went to a good school, Christine.
Yeah, that was funny when I heard
And then
that.
it's got some like really dark lyrics too, like um there's a line where he says, take take from this deluge of memes with cryptic dark Bible quotes, guns and dead fetuses. Seriously, Christine, are you okay? Like very Ben Folds, like just that, kind of wit that he has in his songs. But musically, especially in the middle of the album is a little bit of a slow down drag for me, just because it sounds like what he was doing on his last album. So that's why I do appreciate the more upbeat moments on this album, like Winslow's Gardens, like But Wait, There's More, and like the closing track moments. So overall, I enjoy this album. I don't think it's the strongest, but if this is his last like full album, I do think it ending with like moments is a very sweet, kind of touching way to end the album. Very upbeat way. Um,
And
and
well
yeah,
said about Christine from seventh grade. I haven't heard his last album to be honest, but I do agree that it really it's the 5 minute song that really is a lull in the album, especially right after Fragile. I think that was kind of poor placement to be frank.
yeah, you only have 10 songs on this album. Actually, I think all the albums we're talking about today have like just 10 songs. So they're relatively short albums, but yeah, like this isn't a perfect album for sure, and it's not going to be like in my top like, maybe two or three Ben Folds albums, but I do think it's a nice bounce back from his last album, which was in a very different style. And I will be putting this album, spinning in and listening to it more throughout the rest of the year because it does have a nice mix of songs. So I don't know. I usually don't like grade albums on a scale, but like I'd give this one like out of 10. Like I'd give it like a solid 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I would say probably if I had to rank it, just like being fair overall, probably like a 7. But it although underwhelming, it does feel fresh. So to me, I kind of like it more like a 7.5, almost like an 8. But I
Yeah,
think I'm not sure how the replay value will be with this album. To be honest, it's
I think it'll
definitely
grow
a
on you.
vibe one.
Yeah, I think most of the songs will grow on you. Like I know for me, Exhausting Lover and Fragile maybe won't, but all the other songs that didn't click with me on first listen, they have grown on me. So I
I'm
definitely think it's a
satisfied.
grower.
I'm satisfied with this Ben release.
Yes. Now we're going to move on to the most recent Foo Fighters album titled But Here We Are, which was released actually the same day as the Ben Folds album last month in June. And, going into this album, I think everyone knew it was going to be kind of a tough listen. As you may know, this is the first album since the passing of Taylor Hawkins, the band's drummer. And Dave Grohl also lost his mom in the same year. So Dave Grohl dealing with a lot of loss. And I think a lot of people were surprised they released an album so soon afterwards. But if you got to think back to when, Nirvana and with Kurt Cobain's passing, Dave Grohl, I think to get through the loss, wrote music, and that's how the Foo Fighters started. So I guess we shouldn't be as surprised. But going into this album, we knew it was going to be probably a tough album. And I listened to the singles as they were released. First, they released Rescued, the album opener, then Under You, Show Me How, The Teacher. That was like the last one before the album dropped.
The Teacher was a single.
Yeah, it's actually the only one too that had a music video as well.
Oh, the 10-minute song, huh?
Yeah. And going into this album, I'm excited to hear what you thought of this album because I have all their albums and I've listened to them all. I was not my least favorite album of theirs was the one they released called Concrete and Gold. And then after that, Medicine at Midnight, which was the one before this, I thought was a nice little bounce back, but it still wasn't my favorite. So I was kind of on the kind of downward slope of liking their albums a little bit over their last couple. So I was hoping this one would kind of change things for me. But for you, I know you haven't really stayed up to date with them as much. So I'm curious when you first heard this, what your reactions were.
Well, I have gathered some pretty strong thoughts. I was, because I haven't been on the Foo Fighters train for a while now, I definitely do enjoy a lot of their early work, like not just their first album, I was kind of curious to listen to a full Foo Fighters album, especially one, their latest, pretty modern. And I will say this. This album, I think, is a great rough draft of an album. Now, what I mean by that is this album is kind of like Saint Anger in the sense that it's very stripped back. There's very little overdubs. I think there was only like one thing that could maybe be considered a guitar solo, but it was very underwhelming. Now, that being said, I honestly think the first 7 songs, from Rescue to Show Me How, are pretty good songs, honestly. All of them, I liked things about them. The Glass kind of being maybe my least favorite just because it's it has like that 2000s kind of like, rock sound thing going for it. But the last 3 really dragged me down. Like I could probably end the album at Show Me How and be good.
So very interesting. You made a lot of comments there that are all very interesting. The first comment being how you thought it was a very good draft of an album. Why do you say that? Do you think some of the songs felt unfinished to you, or do you feel like because you didn't like the last 3, that means there was only really 7 songs you enjoyed, which is almost, it's either a very short album or a very long EP. Is that why you think it's like a draft of an album?
Mostly because I feel like the songs really could have used some overdubs, and I'm not saying every song has to be maxed out. I mean, I think the songs themselves, the riffs are classic Foo Fighters riff. There's a few odd time signatures, classic. And honestly, I think Dave sounds great on most of these songs. His yells are pretty brutal on here. But that's the thing, they're a band with three guitarists, and I just feel like most of these songs are just power chords, and the few guitar leads are just following the vocal melody. And I think about a lot of Foo Fighter songs I like, and they have like great lead guitars. Like Times Like the, or no, what's was it? Learn to Fly, the airplane one or whatever.
Yeah,
Like,
Learn to Fly is that you mean the music video?
yeah, yeah,
That's Learn to Fly.
yeah. Like I think that one has like a really cool lead guitar part that sounds very Foo Fighters like, and it's those type of details and things that I think really make their songs go from good to great.
See,
Um,
I guess when I came into this album, besides like the actual like what the album's going to be about, I my expectations were a little lower just because I didn't and love their last two albums, and also because when I listen to a Foo Fighters album, I enjoy the band a lot. Are they like a top 10 band? No, and that's because I do think they play things safe a lot of the times. Like you mentioned, for the most part, they've always had they've always had at least two guitars, but for a good part of their career, they had three guitars. Pat Smear being kind of like the extra guy, and they've never really had like they're almost kind of like Pearl Jam in a way, where like even when you have all three of them playing guitar, it's like it's you really don't need that third guitar most of the time. And they're a band that likes to play it safe. And I will say the last album and the one before that, there was more kind of overdubs and stuff, and that was actually kind of some of the reasons why I didn't love it. Some of it also just
really,
being the songwriting, and yeah, but some of it also just being the production. And I think the worst part about this album, this new one, is the production, which we'll get into. But um, that said, like I went into it knowing this is going to be safer than like the new Queens of the Stone Age, or this is going to be safer than a lot of the other bands I like who are releasing new albums. And I was mostly right about that. It's pretty safe musically. That said, I consider this kind of their almost one of their like back to basics albums. When a band kind of ventures off into different genres and experimentation, this felt like a nice return to form. I think this is their most solid album since probably Wasting Light, which is has been a while since Wasting Light came out.
and Wasting Light's fantastic, by the way.
Yeah,
Just clarifying.
and this isn't as good because like Wasting Light is like they went into that album just like we're gonna rock hard, we're just gonna like we're either gonna write really heavy songs or we're gonna write really catchy songs, and there's like almost no misses on that album. This album is kind of like that, but it's through the trauma and loss of Taylor Hawkins and Dave's mom, and it's also kind of maybe partially a COVID album. Um, and I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. That said, I I almost agree with you a little bit about the last three songs. I will say it does not. I think the middle part of the album, the beginning and the middle, are my favorite parts. I don't know if I'd go as far to say like I would end the album after Show Me How, but um, I will say that Beyond Me is I think maybe the weakest song.
Pretty
Uh,
boring.
I think The Teacher, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more, is definitely their most ambitious song yet. It's a 10-minute song. It's a little proggy. It has like kind of different moments in the song, different like riffs, and it kind of goes all over the place. And then you end the album with Rest, which I kind of think is a song that's getting a little overrated by hardcore fans on the Foo Fighter subreddit. Um, People just love the song because of like the sentiment behind it, and people are like, "This is the song I cried to the most," and I
Which is
totally understand.
understandable.
I totally understand that. Yeah, like this song is if you've ever lost someone in your life, this song will hit you like a ton of bricks. That said, I like I didn't love when the middle part gets really loud because I just think the production on this album holds a lot of the songs back. I think it's so overproduced. Like it's like the loudness wars again. It's so compressed that I think that took away from that closing track. Um, And I don't know, I just found a lot of the other songs on the album to be more interesting than Rest. So I do think Rest is kind of the most overrated. The Teacher took forever to grow on me, and it's still kind of growing on me. And then I think Beyond Me is like my least favorite, or at least the weakest. That said, I really enjoy like the first 7 songs, and I actually really enjoy The Glass. That one I did not think I would like as much because like you said, it is kind of like that 2000s ballad, and it almost has like a little. It almost starts off like you think it's going to be kind of like a country kind of twang to it, but I really
Yeah.
enjoyed. I really enjoyed The Glass. It's really hooky to me. I love the verse and I love the chorus, which sometimes in a Foo Fighter song I usually like one or the other.
Yeah, once you get about halfway, like I admit, I'm tapping my foot to it. It if I were to like pick a song to listen to, I wouldn't listen to that one. But when it comes on, I do enjoy it.
So
And
what were your favorites then?
I really liked "Show Me How" because I think it was like the only song that had like production that was like that stood out to me. The chorusy tones.
That's probably my favorite on the album. Has a shoegaze quality to it, which is not a genre that you and I have dabbled in too much. But every time I hear a band that I like do shoegaze, like the Foo Fighters, or last year on the Death Cab for Cuties latest record, they did a shoegaze song, and it was my favorite on the album. So we might have to give some shoegaze a listen here in the future. But yeah,
Yeah,
that to me,
my friend Connor, he's really into shoegaze, so I've actually kind of been trying to dip my toes in there, and that's actually a good point. We should take a dive. And if you're asking what my favorites are, I mean, I do like kind of some of the singles. I mean, I like some of the straightforward ones. I Rescued, Under You, But Here We Are. They just rock. One of them is in 7.
that's but here we are.
Okay, yeah. That one was cool.
That one's actually I think my favorite. I think I said Show Me How is my favorite, but here we are, the title track. Yeah, the time signature being different, different than standard 4/4 was interesting.
And it's
The guitar,
classic Foo Fighters.
it's classic, but it also maybe the time signature being different makes it seem fresh. The guitar riffs were really kind of cool, like, and there were parts during the end where the drums go heavy as hell, where it's almost like it the song almost sounds like it's going to get a little prog. It doesn't quite get there, but like there's moments where the song like goes in different directions than you're expecting. And I think it's Dave's most passionate vocals on the whole album. Like just the him screaming, like, I gave you my heart, but here we are. Like, and his like O's in the song are very like best of you kind of sounding. Like it's very classic, but to me it sounds fresh. And that one's my favorite. But Show Me How is fantastic too. Show Me How also, if you didn't know, there's a female vocalist when you listen to the song. It's almost like a duet, and that's actually his daughter, Violet Grohl, doing the vocals.
Really? I
Yeah.
was kind of wondering about that
And
on the
she's actually been
vocals.
touring with him and like doing that song and a couple others with him on stage. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. And real quick to go back to But Here We Are. I do love a title track that delivers. Where the Ben Folds title track was a little underwhelming. I mean, like we said, it was like mature and it fit the album, but so yeah, you know what, yeah. But Here We Are and Show Me How are probably also my favorites. So kind of interesting that you and I picked the same. That's not always the case.
But I do like the first track, Rescue. It's a decent beginning song, decent first single. Nothing crazy, but it's kind of, again, sounds like them kind of going back to their roots. It sounds kind of like a little bit like a In Your Honor sound. And then Under You, the second single and second song on the album, reminded me a little bit of like There's Nothing Left to Lose, which is my favorite Foo Fighters album.
Yeah. I was thinking that.
The bass line in the pre-chorus like is actually audible and you could hear it, and it reminds me of songs of like Next Year and like Generator, where you can hear the bass line and stuff. Like it gave me vibes and shades of There's Nothing Left to Lose.
For sure. And one more track stood out to me. Hearing Voices, and the reason that stood out to me was I really liked how at the end they faded out to what I assume
outro,
is the demo track. To me, that was the most emotional part on the album. I
was
feel like even though Rest, it has the sentiment, and they did the huge distortion thing, I don't think that worked as well for, that didn't hit me in the same way that the ending of Hearing Voices did.
Yeah, and they do kind of like on Nothing at All, they have like a compression on Dave's vocals, which I think distracts from the song. And like the ending of The Teacher, they get it to the point where it's like almost it's basically clipping. Like it's just, and I know it was like purposely done to make the the very vulnerable intro of the next song, Rest, like make it be a really in your face transition, but I just think it didn't work. Where I like you said, the choice to end hearing voices with just Dave with an acoustic guitar and piano is beautiful. It sounds raw because it sounds like you said, it sounds like the demo of the song, and it works so well.
Yeah.
So by far the best production choice, because to me, I don't know if you think the same. I think production holds this album back. Like I think the vinyl doesn't sound amazing. Like just listening to it on my headphones, like it sounds so loud, so compressed. I'm hoping, I know they've had the same producer for the last three albums. I'm hoping the next album, if they do another album, they switch it up because it's just like too loud, too compressed for me. And I'm not even someone that usually cares about that stuff too much. Because if you did say this album is like Saint
Um,
Anger, I would agree in the sense that the production kind of sucks like Saint Anger. Sorry, Bob Rock, who released the Gord Downie album earlier this year that I loved. He did, for the most part, he did great on that album. He did not do great on Saint Anger.
but I'll say this though. I'll say this. At least Saint Anger sounds heavy. Now, for me, like I said, this album's like a draft. So what's the basis? What is this standing on this album? It's standing on these, power chord riffs and Dave's vocals. And I think Dave's vocals sound pretty good. Granted, we talked about kind of overproduced loudness wars.
I agree. His vocals, he sounds great on this album.
But if the songs, especially the ones that are kind of throwbacks, like Under You and like Rescued, if those sounded like a loud rock album, like some of their earlier releases, I think they would have hit a lot harder. And once again, especially without the overdubs, without the ear candy, without the extra, depth to the album, it really just needs to have these fat guitars that are loud but not squashed.
Well,
And yeah.
oh, I just want to ask you, what do you think about the teacher? That's the last thing I want to ask because I know it sounded like Beyond Me for you was just like a sleeper track. You and I both said that Rest just
Didn't hit the
maybe,
way it should have.
yeah, even though it did for most people. But the teacher, I think, is the most like, you know, like it's a song on the album that people have the most mixed opinions on, and I'm one of those people because like on first listen, I did not enjoy it at all. And then like now I enjoy most of it, but I still think it's like too long. Like, is it just the same for you? Like it's too much?
Now
Done trying too hard?
I am someone that does like prog, and I do listen to it. I don't like listen to every single prog band that I can think of, but I do appreciate prog and long songs and everything. But to me, I'm glad they tried it. I'm glad I tried it, and I think there is good bits in the song, but I don't think a lot of sections are super memorable to me. And even the parts that are, I still kind of have some critiques. I think maybe they could have done some things better. And it just kind of sucks that the last three songs are and excuse me if I'm speaking too opinionated here, you get a kind of a sleeper ballad thing. You get this 10-minute song that has potential but doesn't quite hit the mark, and then followed by 5-minute song that's very, very unenergetic. Not bad, but unenergetic, and then gets kind of the that super loud ending that you and I aren't super fond of in this case. And so to me, it was maybe if the placement of the teacher was different, I may enjoy it more. Maybe I just need to listen to it a few more times. And I have heard this album like probably like 4 or 5 times, and I feel like I'm actually pretty familiar with it already. But I think it's very interesting that you and I feel pretty much the exact same way about the album. That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, I would give this album. I would probably rate it a. I think I would. I think it's a little bit more solid than the Ben Folds, even though I think the Ben Folds is better produced. And I do.
I
Think
could listen to the Ben Folds more and be happy with it, where this one would get old fast.
Yeah, so I don't know how I maybe would give this one if I give the Ben Folds like a 7.5, I'd maybe give this one like a 7. Like they're close because like I do think this album is almost more solid. Like if I just listen to them back to back, this one like the Foo Fighters one flows better. But I do think there's better moments on the Ben Folds, and overall, it's a more enjoyable listen. But I am impressed with how good the Foo Fighters one was. And I going into it, I'm like, they can't mess this album up because of how important it is.
That's a really good statement there. And for me, I would probably, don't get me wrong, I'd probably rate it like a 6, but that's because 3 of the songs I don't care for, and because it's 10 minutes, not that I don't care for, but 3 of the songs
And
didn't hit the mark, and that's almost 20 minutes of the album right there.
yeah, the album's only
Um,
20, it's only 10 songs. So, you know,
yeah, and one of those 3 is a 10-minute song. And I just feel like there's not a lot of depth to the album. I'm not trying to be a guy, again, that says every song needs 30 parts, but I think Ben Folds has more interesting instrumentation, much better production. And so to me, if this album was only 7 songs, it would probably, go up a little bit for me. And if the songs were maybe a little more fleshed out, I mean, the structures are fine, the vocals sound great, but if the production and there was a few more layers added, I think this could be a really, really great Foo Fighters album, honestly.
yeah, for sure. Okay, we got one more album to talk about this episode, and that is the most recent Queens of the Stone Age album called In Times New Roman. It was released, like, I think, like the week after, 2 weeks after the Foo Fighters and Ben Folds album in June, and it's their 8th album. And the little background to it is like, you know, the band, Josh Homme, lead singer, frontman, kind of has been through a lot the last, couple years. Obviously, this is like their first album since COVID. He's been through a divorce, kind of very publicly. He's lost some close friends to him, like Anthony Bourdain and Mark Lanigan, who, was also in the band at times. And he also, I think in an interview I read, that he actually had like stomach cancer that he had to get treated like last year, like very recently.
Which he didn't
So
like disclose until like after his like treatment, right?
yeah, they didn't know that going into this album. Like the public didn't know that. So, um, I was expecting a dark album, and I do think it's dark. I don't think it's as dark as like Clockwork. And by the way, this is actually supposed to be the 3rd album in a trilogy. It's supposed to be like the last one, I guess, because like Clockwork, it's ... like Clockwork. And then the album after that was Villains, and this one's called In Times New Roman ... So the little, for this album and like Clockwork, I guess, is supposed to kind of symbolize like that those 3 albums consecutively are like a trilogy. And we both know that I love like Clockwork. You love it too. You and I both talked about Villains actually, I think last month, how it's an album that maybe isn't their best, but maybe gets a little overhated on. So going into this album, I was excited because I was hoping it would be slightly better than Villains. But I was also expecting it not to be as good as like Clockwork, which is my favorite from them. And I would say this is actually one of my top albums so far this year. I this one hit even harder than I was expecting it to, and I enjoyed it way more than I was expecting it to. I like it more than the Foo Fighters, and I think I like it more than Ben Folds, even though I would usually say both of those bands I prefer over Queens of the Stone Age. But I really enjoy this record. But I think when you and I were talking about it, texting each other, you weren't as thrilled with this album. Is that correct?
I was not sold on it. Not to spoil right away at first. I was very excited for the album. I love Queens of the Stone Age, and you and I kind of like different things about Queens of the Stone Age, but we both really agree on like Clockwork, that it's fantastic. It kind of shows that, the band has matured and that they are kind of doing a different styles. I know we did a podcast, where we talked about Villains, and I actually did appreciate it a lot more coming around listening to it again. That being said, some of these songs, at least on first listen, kind of felt a little bit like Villains leftovers. But I don't know. I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't want to have expectations. But I think maybe this album was a little bit underwhelming in some ways as well. I will admit that I'm having a hard time trying to kind of articulate why. I don't think I'm holding a bias or anything. But a lot of things didn't stand out to me on first listen. That being said, as I listened back the other day, and even today listening back, I think there is a lot of songs that are solid. But maybe it's kind of hard to separate some of the songs. A lot of the production's very similar to the tracks. Um, that being said, though, there are some very catchy songs, and we'll also have to talk about that. Their 9-minute song, not quite the teacher, but kind of similar. We'll have to talk about that. But Rico, you are someone that actually really enjoyed this album, which kind of shocked me. What are your first thoughts?
I mean, first, the lead single we got, emotion sickness. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was kind of like a slightly like darker and less polished, villain song. And I thought it was super catchy, and I thought it had a little bit more of a classic kind of Queens of the Stone Age vibe. And then the second single, Carnivore, was a little bit more like disappointing because it like tried really hard to be like a kind of soundscape song, kind of like a like Clockwork song, but like maybe a little bit more like modern. And I just think the production and kind of just the songwriting where it was all over the place kind of killed it a little bit for me. That said though, when I like first listened to the album all the way through, I was kind of, because it's 10 songs again, just like the other jams we talked about today. And there was only like, now that I've listened to it like, over 10 times, there's really only like one song that hasn't fully grown on me, which is pretty impressive. It's an album that like for like the first 5 listens, each listen got better and better for me. And I think it's actually, even though I really enjoy Villains, I think it's way stronger than Villains. And this could be maybe like a top 3 album for me. I think it's from them. Like I think it's very strong.
Because you would do
Um,
what? You would do like Clockwork, of course, and then you would do Rated R.
yeah, Rated R would probably be second. It's hard for me to rate their albums because like I would actually say probably Lullabies, the first half is stronger than Rated R, but then the like the very end of the album kind of drags on for me. And then Era is actually I think a little underrated, but then like it also has some songs that drags it down. That said, this might even be my second favorite. Like there's nothing really that there's not too
Wow.
much about this album that drags it down. Like there's only like the only song that has not fully grown on me is Sicily. That's the only song. Every other song, even Carnivore, which is probably my second least favorite, that one actually has grown on me way more. And then the opening track, Obscenery, on first listen, I couldn't get into that song at all. So I was kind of worried I was not going to like the album. But just like last week, it finally, like, I found the groove of the song and I really enjoy it. It's like a top track now. So, um, it's just, yeah, it's kind of blown me away about how much I've enjoyed this album.
I think the thing for me though is that the highs don't stand out above a slightly better than average song. Now, real quick, let me just kind of agree with you here. I do think that my least favorites are also Sicily and Carnivore. By the way, there's like a few different like puns, like what the peephole say, which I think is a
Well,
little too tongue in cheek here.
yeah, I
Um,
mean, so there's some callbacks to villains, which I think is kind of cool. At the very so on Villains, there's a song called "The Evil Has Landed," which is my favorite from the album. And at the very end of the song, he says, "That is not what the people say," like people.
ah,
So then he took that phrase, "what the people say," and changed it to "what the peephole say," which it does kind of sound stupid when you like first hear it, but then when it connects to the previous album, I think it's a little bit more clever. There's definitely a lot of wordplay on this album, and I guess people said that Josh Homme, when he writes his lyrics, he's always done that. I think it's almost
eh,
overdone a little bit on this album because there are some lines where like he says like technology Jesus is a lyric in the last song, Straight Jacket Fitting,
and I
which is
say to
kind of
that,
clever.
Jesus Christ.
But the one that I don't love, and I don't really love repeating it, is voyeurism jism, which is like kind of dumb. Yeah, the phrase "what the people say," carnivore, like taking the word like carnivore and voyeur and putting them together. Um, and there's other ones too.
You could
There,
even argue that paper machete, like paper mache.
Yeah,
Maybe you
like
could argue that.
there's a lot of like kind of wordplay here, which I used to really love. I do think on this album he does a little much, but then there's a lot of other lyrics on this album where they're straightforward. Like I think like during the bridge of um I think paper machete. There's a part where it's like a really short bridge right before the guitar solo where he says, "So long, my love is dead," which is just for him is very straightforward. And again, because it's a divorce album, it's hard hitting if you know the background. Straight jacket fitting is also for the most part like for straightforward song lyrically, very hard hitting. Um, and then even I think time and play or no negative space. There's a part which is also like a bridge where he sings pulling it up he sings um I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it. Oh, he says, "Thought we were equals, broken peoples keep score," which I thought was just like a cool line. It's not super like over the top wordplay, but it's just like kind of more of a straightforward line, but it's very hard hitting. Or even a line earlier in the song where he sings, "My love will not survive emotion sickness, I want to die," which is him referencing the later track on the album, Emotion Sickness. So there are parts lyrically that I really like on this album, but then there are those other ones that we mentioned that are a little over the top. Kind of like with the Ben Folds song Exhausted Lover.
Right.
Exhausting Lover, I mean.
And yeah, I think for me that's my big thing is that the highs on the album don't necessarily stand out and they're not super high highs. That being said, I do enjoy the album a lot more now after listening to it a few times. Um, there's a few songs that I think kind of suffer from just being boring. The big ones being Sicily, Carnivore, and even Paper Machete a little bit. I do appreciate that one a little more now, but it's just a bit repetitive.
See, it's to me, Paper Machete is just like Little Sister Part Two, and a lot of people have said that, and maybe it's because the guitar solo is kind of a very similar guitar solo to Little Sister, but just like that, kind of like the riff and like just kind of like the rhythm, it in the fast kind of tempo, which maybe that's why you don't love it because it sounds like something you've heard before from them. But I loved it just because it sounded. They haven't done that sound since Lullabies, which has been a while.
Yeah, I think the vocals are a little lacking with the part. I don't know, they don't
That's
do a
my
lot
least
for me.
favorite part on this album, besides some of the lyrics, is I do think just like with any of their albums, the falsetto after a while starts to get a little grating to me.
Yeah, I mean, like, I will say there's moments where he sounds pretty good on the album, and Villains too. Like, I think Villains was kind of the sign that maybe he should try to maybe not adopt a whole new vocal style, but I think maybe he should sing something that kind of he's not nailing it all the time for me. I'll say that. And I didn't really dig the whole Ginger Elvis thing. Isn't that what people call it?
Yeah, it's his nickname.
Is his nickname. I wasn't really digging that. I think the falsetto is getting a little stale now. So I don't know. I couldn't really tell you what I think you should do. But there's just things that aren't hitting right for me. But let's talk about some good stuff that I really enjoyed. I did really enjoy Time and Place. That kind of I don't know if
Weird.
it's
It's a
polymeter guitar, but
Yeah, like when the guitar starts and then the other guitars start after it, it's like in a totally different rhythm. But it kind of makes this kind of what makes the song interesting to me.
yeah, that feels like a classic Queen's move.
It's to me, it's like the if I had a tale of the album where the music
Yeah,
doesn't change too much, but it's just a solid groove that just you just kind of vibe with the whole song.
where I think they kind of tried on Carnivore, but like you said, it's more of a soundscape approach, and it didn't quite hit.
Yeah,
Um,
so that I do agree that is a high point on the album for me.
and I dig Negative Space and What the People Say. I thought those were easy jams to get into.
Negative
Um,
Space is like I feel like the desert rock song on the album. It's still rocking and it has a good chorus and it's catchy, but it's
drums
kind
are
of more of the
great.
stoner rock. Yeah.
Good
Um,
point.
and then what the people say is like a better version of Head Like a Haunted House, where it's kind of got that like kind of dancey, almost
Yeah,
rockabilly feel to it, but it's kind of got more interesting parts like the tonight is the night part, which is kind of fun. And like the backing vocals are kind of interesting. Like it's a fun song with a great bass line.
and I like the vocal delivery a little more. It's a little less. Um, kind of silly, maybe I guess is the word. I'm not sure. And shout out to the first single, Emotion Sickness. I I think it's a it's an interesting riff, and the real highlight to me is that vocal hook, that like falsetto in the chorus. I thought that felt that the way he did it there felt fresh. It kind of felt. I think we also kind of mentioned maybe a little throwback, maybe a little '70s type of vibe.
There's good harmonies too, because when I sing that song, I sing like because I don't want to do the falsetto. I just do the "Baby Don't Care for Me." Like it's fun to sing along to.
Right, right. And maybe now we're kind of talking about a lot of the bulk of the album. Now let me ask you this time. So how do you feel about the longest track on the album, the closing track, "Straight Jacket Fitting"?
It's my favorite.
Wow, was
It's
not expecting that.
well after the Foo Fighters one, I was like, okay, the Foo Fighters 10-minute song was not my favorite. So I'm like, okay, the Queens of the Stone Age 9-minute song probably won't be my favorite. But I love really everything about it. I mean, first of all, if we're being fair, it's more like an 8-minute song because the last like minute and a half is an acoustic, like two acoustic guitars just doing like the song ends and then like they fade in these two acoustic guitars, which I actually read is them playing the riffs to the very first song, Obscenery, but in
Oh,
like a
okay.
slower acoustic version. So it does kind of bookend the album nicely.
I feel bad for not noticing that. I'll
But it's still
listen.
like a full 7.5, 8-minute song. I love the main riff. It's kind of a slower, kind of sludgy, kind of dirty bluesy riff, which I liked. I think the vocals are catchy, like just the main kind of hooky singing. But then it has parts. It kind of evolves in I think a less chaotic way than the teacher from the Foo Fighters. Like I like the part where he does the falsetto, like you know, tell myself I can do this, but I'm having my doubts. That part I think is interesting. It's almost like a pre-chorus because then like the chorus is like the what do you do, which is a melody line that I actually have in one of my own songs I've originally written like a long time
No.
ago. So it's kind of like, damn, they beat me to the punch. So maybe that's why I like that melody so much, is because I wrote a song that has a very similar melody. It's almost even the same lyrics I had too, which is really bizarre. But and then you get like to like the centerpiece of the song, which is where the band changes the riff completely and they start doing this Roadhouse Blues riff, which I'm so glad you gave me that album from the Doors a while ago because now I can reference it while listening to this song because it does have a very Doors delivery like Roadhouse Blues. Even lyrically, like or vocally, Josh Homme is kind of doing, I feel like a Jim Morrison, where he's just like throwing out phrases. And as that part progresses, his voice gets like rougher, rawer. He's almost like screaming at times, which he doesn't normally do. Like he's not the one that screams in the band. That used to be Nick. But since whenever Nick left, they don't really have those screaming vocals anymore. But he's kind of doing like a kind of raw attempt at the vocals. And then I think the lyrics are really great. He does kind of a little bit of that play on words when he sings Carpe Diem instead of Carpe Diem.
Right.
Um, but it builds, that part builds, it has like strings, and then they just kind of go back to like the chorus again, and then it kind of ends with the riff, it kind of slows the song down, and then it nicely fades in that acoustic outro, which is just a kind of a nice touch to the album. Like it's like Lightning Song Part 2 kind of. So I love it's kind of that Straight Jacket Fitting is a roller coaster of a song. I think lyrically it's like kind of like what the whole album is about. And I think it's the most interesting musically, especially for like a 9-minute song.
Well, may I first applaud you. That was a fantastic analysis of the song. I can really tell that is your favorite. Um, it's honestly one of my favorites too. I admit, because I haven't heard the album a buttload, I haven't had a chance to listen, or I haven't taken the opportunity to listen super thoroughly to the song like that. But I think you kind of nailed it with your description of it. Like first off, I think it's kind of excusable that there's like a long acoustic outro at the end. I feel like if it was in the middle of the album, it should be a much shorter outro. But it's the ending of the album, and like you said, it does bookend it well if they do the obscenery tag at the end. I think what I noticed with this compared to the teacher is I feel like the teacher really kind of forced the prog approach. And once again, I liked prog. I like, yes, like kind of really bold, out there, fast changing parts. But I feel like the teacher kind of felt a little more forced. Where I feel like for a straight jacket fitting, they really all of the elements they did really did serve the song. I think the vocal, melody and performance is very strong throughout, which is kind of something that I didn't love throughout the whole album. And it felt like a real band song too, which was cool because, like you said, again, you made great points about this album. Like Carnivoyeur was kind of more of a soundscape sort of thing.
Sicily kind of is too. Like it's kind of the
Right.
same groove. It's like this really dark, almost Halloween kind of sound, but it's like the same thing the whole song. Some people love it, some people like it's my favorite, and I'm like,
Really?
I
Isn't it
just think
just
it's
like two sections just back and forth that are
yeah,
not
and then
even
like
that
and like
different?
the production is nice, but it's better production than Carnivore is the worst production on the album. Like, I don't that ending. I don't know what they were doing. Where it, like again, it's like the teacher where it like clips. But I agree. Like those two songs are definitely more about the sounds than the actual song structure.
Right, right. So it was cool to see them piece together a song, and it was long, but it felt fitting because even a song from Lullabies, something in the Wolf, I feel like this song kind of makes more sense. I feel like this one kind of warrants it being long a little more than something in the Wolf.
Well, may I add? I think Straight Jacket Fitting is the I Appear Missing of the album.
Oh,
It's
oh,
longer. It's kind of the theme of the album. It's probably one of the darker songs on the album. It's the most like kind of like out there kind of prog song on the album. I don't I think I Appear Missing I like it better as a song than Straight Jacket Fitting because it is a
it's
little bit
more
more
of a,
lean.
yeah, trim the
But
fat.
I think this is like the I Appear Missing of the album, which is probably why it's my favorite.
Okay, well, okay, so real quick before we kind of maybe give our kind of our summary score, on here. Now, you mentioned that Like Clockwork, Villains, and In Times New Roman is a trilogy. Now, I don't know if I'm just not thinking hard enough, but I'm kind of failing to see what makes it a trilogy. It kind of feels like they kind of just slapped that on. And I understand the dot dot dot, which is cool that they did that, but I'm kind of maybe failing to see a strong connection between them.
To be fair, I am too. I think when he like tried to explain it in a couple of interviews, he was very light on it about like what makes it because he says he's tried to done trilogies before in the past. Like I think he maybe even said like songs. Well, wait. I think he was trying to say like what was before Lullabies? Was it Songs for the Deaf?
Isn't it Era?
No, Era's after Lullabies.
Oh wait.
I don't know. Like I think he was trying to do. I think maybe Lullabies and Era was supposed to be the start of a trilogy, and then when he had to have that surgery done, when he had he had another disease, and then he almost died during the surgery. Like what ended up becoming like Clockwork. That was supposed to be a trilogy too, but then it didn't end up being a trilogy. So theme wise, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's like Clockwork is like a near death experience. Villains is like trying to get back into the swing of things. And then I feel like this album is kind of like growing up, losing people in your life, either physically or emotionally, and having to move on from it. That said, I don't think it's like a perfect, like, I think you do have to kind of reach and stretch to.
Especially with Villains, I feel like I could see the connection between Like Clockwork and In Times New
I think,
Roman.
I think musically, I like some of these songs I think do sound like Villains. Like, I do think Emotion Sickness has a fun kind of dancey vibe of Villains. I think what the people say is definitely like the most Villain songs. And even like Made to Parade, which we didn't really talk about, like that one has a production of like a Era song or the Lullaby song, but it's like kind of a more upbeat song. And like the ending has like this kind of fun blues outro solo, which I feel like is something you'd find on Villains.
But yeah,
And
but
it's
that's
not,
the thing though, is that I feel like if you're looking at it maybe more like in a thematic way, and like you said, like he was going through like some like cancer treatment and stuff, which is kind of like, well, Like Clockwork's about near death. This is written around that time with surgery. You could connect it thematically, but I feel like musically you can mostly connect it just with Villains. So I
well, I
don't
mean,
know.
we did connect some of these songs to like Clockwork, like
Oh,
Straight
we did
Jack.
say
And then I even think,
time
like
and
I said,
place.
time and place is like if I had a tail. So I don't know. I think they're I think it's a solid stretch of albums. If I had to rank them, I would definitely go like Clockwork first, and then this one, then Villains. You know, I give this album. This is an 8 for me, and I could see this even jumping to 8.5 at some
Wow.
point. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Um, it's 10 songs, and two of them I'm not the biggest fan of, so it's like not. There's another album that we have yet to talk about that is by far right now like the front runner of my favorite for the year, and there's at least one more album we're looking forward to later this year, which is the new Brad album. So I can't, yeah, and there might be some surprise albums, who knows? But there's another album we haven't talked about yet, which is my favorite so far. But this one is like the runner up.
Okay, and I feel like an 8. You know, kind of the more you run it through, maybe I'm not as surprised that you really enjoyed it this much. I'm still a little surprised though, especially because I feel like not that you ragged on them too hard, but some of the lows, Carnivoy and Sicily, were pretty dull in
Well,
compared
that's the
to
thing
the
is with
rest.
Queens of the Stone Age. Their highs are highs to me, and then their lows are kind of low. That's why they're kind of an
Fair.
inconsistent band for my taste, for my likings.
And something that I guess we didn't really mention too much is this is what, like, the third album in a row with the same band
Which I think is
lineup.
why musically it's super strong. I mean, I think like Clockwork is super strong, but I think it's because like that had to do with a lot of Josh's writing. But then Villains showed like the band could be fun, and the other band members, even like adding in Dean, like he felt like he was really added to the band. And then this album, I feel like it's the most like band effort so far. Because I saw some of the live performances too from their most recent live shows and festivals. And these songs sound great live too, especially Straight Jacket Fitting. They debuted it live a couple days ago.
Oh,
And he got the crowd to sing that like Carpe Diem part, like that bridge where it's just the strings. And it
really?
was, I'll send you the video later. Yeah, like he even stopped the band from playing music so he could just have the crowd do it. And they sounded super loud and it sounded great. Yeah, it was a great live performance. And it was the first one too. And during that Roadhouse Blues part in the middle, he lets go of the guitar. He puts the guitar down and he walks around the stage with just a microphone singing it.
That sounds fun. That sounds fun.
So
Now, I mean, and keep in mind, I really did not try to compare this album to their earlier work. I mean, because to me, nothing will ever top the Nick Grohl, Lanigan, Josh lineup. That's one of my favorite lineups of any bands. But I'm not comparing it to that. I'm looking at this, as its own album, new, and I would probably give it maybe like maybe also like a solid 7. I think it's a good work. I'm glad they put it out. There's songs that I'm growing closer to. And it probably could go up to 7.5, and maybe not like a full 8. It's kind of hard to compare this to like the Ben Folds, for example. And even the Foo Fighters, it is pretty different because this one has a bunch of layering, a bunch of bold production choices. Where I feel like when the Foo Fighters did the production on the album, it's just like, okay, let's go soft and super loud, and soft and super
yeah,
loud.
that's
Where
that's fair.
this was a lot more. I appreciate the thought that was put on this record. I'll say that.
Yeah. But so far this year we've had some great albums. I mean, these three were definitely, even if they, didn't hit like, our favorites from either of these bands or artists, like we really enjoyed these three. We're still looking forward to the Brad album later this year. Um, and one of the albums I really enjoyed from this year, which I'm not going to spoil too much, is actually an album that I'm giving Tony for this month's album for album series, which is Jason Isbell and the 400 unit with their most recent album, Weather Vane. Um, that's what I gave Tony to listen to for this month. And next week, we're going to be discussing it. And then, Tony, what did you give me for this month?
I gave you one of my favorite albums, The Zombies, Odyssey and Oracle, their 1968 release.
So, we're going to be discussing an album from this year and then an album from the 60s, which I
Fun.
think will be very interesting. Um, and that'll be next week's episodes. The next two episodes will be on Weather Vanes and the Zombies album. And then the following week, we are going to be discussing Tony's album that he released last year, his first solo album titled Good Cause, because it celebrates its 1 year anniversary at the end of this month. And Tony, to kind of, celebrate that and to celebrate you finishing up your second solo album, you have a live show coming up. Why don't you tell the listeners where they can see you perform live later this week?
Yeah, I do. July 15th at 12 to 2 p.m. I'm going to be performing at the Everett Mall. Yeah, I played there last year, almost about a year ago exactly. And it should be a really fun time. Looking forward to just playing and hopefully people just enjoying what they hear. And it's just fun to play music and kind of share a part of yourself, to the world.
So if you live in Everett, Washington, and try to make it out to the mall, see Tony play. He played there around the same time last year when he released Good Cause. It was a very fun show. You can actually, I'll leave a link in the description of this episode to his Facebook page where you can actually watch a live stream and a video mashup of some of the songs he performed at that first concert.
And we'll also link you where you can buy plane tickets to fly in if you're out of town to come see the show.
Unfortunately, no ticket giveaways this episode. Maybe in the future.
We'll see what we can do.
But yeah, next week, album for album. At the end of the month, we will be talking about Tony's album. And that'll wrap it up for this month. So until then, we hope everyone takes care. And you will be hearing from us soon. So until then, bye-bye.